So moving swiftly on to our next topic of the day, shaping sustainable communities. Let's take a look.
A 2022 UN World Food Programme report warned that there will be at least 1.9 billion people suffering from poverty, famine, and starvation by 2023. How can we lift vulnerable communities out of poverty and improve social cohesion? Communities with access to affordable and reliable energy, nutritious food, safe drinking water, and quality healthcare are more resilient and connected. Inclusive climate action and sustainable solutions help communities thrive.
I'd now like to welcome to the stage Reuters journalist Jim Stenman, who will be moderating today's first panel. Joining Jim on are today's panelists, Satya Tripathi, Secretary General, Global Alliance for the Planet, Tyler Rumhi, Director, Reaching Last Mile, and Christina Skirka, CEO of Power for All. Please join me in giving them a warm welcome to the stage, and over to you, Jim.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having us. So this session, as mentioned, is called Shaping Sustainable Communities, and it's all about exploring some of the life-changing benefits of scaling sustainable solutions in last-mile communities. So these are communities that are often isolated to some extent from the rest of the world, and that sometimes lack basic infrastructure, such as electricity, but also other similar elements. And I'm very pleased to have a great panel with me here today. So we have Satya Tripathi, Secretary General of Global Alliance, Sustainable Planet. We also have Tala Al-Romahi, a director with the Crown Prince's Court here in Abu Dhabi, and Christina Skierka, I believe, CEO of Power for All. Thank you very much for joining me today. So I'd like to start with you, Satya. You have over 40 years, so 4 decades of experience in sustainable development. What do you think is the most unifying factor that you've come across when it comes to bringing real-life, tangible results to some of the communities that you're working with?
Well, I'm an optimist, and an incorrigible one at that. I believe that we have within us, as the human race, to actually prevent the worst impacts of climate change. And I'll explain how. 6 years ago, we started supporting a program that was run in Andhra Pradesh state of India. A program where women farmers are actually turning to natural farming. It's not organic farming. There's a very subtle difference. Organic farming is compost-based. Natural farming is a process of bioinoculation. So it's ultra-low cost, where the costs drop by about 80%, and the yields have gone up anywhere between 28 to 200%. And they're about 1 million strong now. The world's largest agroecology-based farming program. We call it restorative agriculture. Agriculture that heals, agriculture that regenerates ecosystems, agriculture that fixes the public economy of people at the bottom of the pyramid, and agriculture that actually brings back public health with a vengeance in a good way. You know, moving away from the pharmacy industrial complex, you know, is what we have now, where you feed yourself with agrochemicals and pesticides, and then you run to the hospitals every few months, breaking your entire individual economy and your piggy bank to survive if you are a poor person. So there are these solutions staring us on our face. We have to be brave, and we are in the United Arab Emirates, which has been a pillar of strength in renewable energy. You know, I was just discussing with some friends about what UAE has achieved. You know, in the last 15 years, what Masdar has achieved, and it's not talked about much, is that it has brought down, through its engagement in the developing world, solar used to sell for $25 cents 15, 16 years ago. Now it actually publicly gets auctioned at around $2 beating coal and any other form of thermal energy. So that's the power of intervention, and that's why I'm so optimistic that UAE is hosting COP28, because it has both the motivation, the inclination, and the resources to actually make it a COP that matters, because the last 27, and forgive me for saying this, I was the head of the UN's Environment Management Group, so I know what I'm talking. We have utterly failed in the last 27 versions. We come up with band-aids at the end of every COP. So this COP can actually matter because they have what it takes. Thank you.
And you talked about farming specifically, but sort of in a broader way. Is there a specific community that you've visited yourself where you've really seen the impact that you explored with us earlier?
I have been with these communities about 100 times now.
Is there one that stands out to you?
Every community, these are women farmers. They're organized along self-help groups of 10 women each, and then there are about 7 million of them, organized into 700,000 self-help groups. And actually, people talk about money not being available to do these things. The year before, a big shout out to the German Development Bank. They put 300 million euros into this program at only 0.5% interest. So when you do the right thing, and that's what people at the bottom of the pyramid are showing us, that when you do the right thing, and at scale, and this is system scale, this is not just scale. So actually, the big actors are willing to step up to the plate and put the resources where it matters. So I can talk about thousands and thousands of communities. It is an enlightening, enlivening, and empowering experience every time you visit them. You know, we often talk about risk and how do we manage risk in all these conversations, because that's how you invest. You should be able to manage your risk. And think about these poor women. Their resilience is this little between one crop cycle to next. What they grow and make in terms of returns determines whether their children will go to school, whether they will even eat. They are willing to change by the millions. So we need to really be thankful to them for the inspiration these women are. So in every community you can, and I actually welcome all of you. Please come and see what these women are doing, and there are 1 million already.
Which obviously has an impact on gender equality as well, as women, farming and they're supporting their family. So I can see how that can affect the communities overall as well. Tala, I'd like to turn to you quickly and ask you why healthcare needs a seat at the table when it comes to building sustainable and climate resilient communities.
Thank you, Jim, for the question. Just to provide some context on reaching the last mile for those who don't know, reaching the last mile represents a portfolio of global health programs funded directly by His Highness the President and focused on eliminating or at least controlling 7 diseases that are preventable and mostly prevalent in the poorest and low resource communities. The reason why this is critical is because the WHO has already stated that climate change is the biggest threat to human health. Put simply, the air we breathe, the water we drink, our access to food, but also our vulnerability to disease is directly tied to the health of our planet. And so if our planet is in crisis, so are we. And we're talking about populations or communities. When we talk about communities, these communities are driven by people who must be productive, and in order to be productive, they need to be healthy. And unfortunately, because the climate crisis has affected our own health, this becomes incredibly important to address. Just to throw out some statistics, and this should not be a surprise to many people in the audience, but climate change and extreme weather conditions due to climate change has increased 5-fold in the last 5 decades. This is extremely frightening. It has killed over 2 million people in the last 5 decades and caused over $3 trillion in losses because of this. Worldwide, air pollution continues to cause deaths. 1 in 5 deaths are due to air pollution. And thousands of those deaths are unfortunately children who die from issues linked to respiratory concerns due to, you know, bad air quality, essentially. So I think that's why we need to have an integral part of the conversations on climate change. And I think what's important to note as well, given that the work that we do are in some of the hardest to reach communities, last mile communities, where resources are already stretched, the health systems there are already at capacity, climate change can only make these outcomes worse. And if we don't begin to address and create more sustainable solutions to addressing global health problems, the situation will only get worse from here. But we're optimistic, and I would say through Reaching the Last Mile are trying to think about innovative ways to address global health and disease control programs, which I can talk about later in this conversation.
And do you think that there's a unique role for Abu Dhabi and the UAE to play in that, given the fact that it's sort of friendly to the West, obviously, but it's become a major hub for the developing world as well?
Absolutely, and the UAE does play a critical role in this, whether it's investing in sustainable and renewable energy, but more pertinent to our portfolio is the investments that are going into supporting global health programs worldwide, not just through private philanthropic grants, but also working very closely with partners on the ground to address these issues, because what we've realized is that local problems require local solutions. And so we cannot come with a mentality that we know the answers to what local concerns are. What we'd like to bring to the table is our will to work very closely and in partnership with committed governments, but also committed local partners that can be part of the solution. One particular example I would bring in is a new pilot program that we launched with Malaria No More that is aimed at addressing and understanding how climate change affects malaria outbreaks. And the challenge with climate change is that changing weather patterns greatly affect vector-borne diseases such as malaria, such as neglected tropical diseases. And up until now, we still, for the most part, don't understand how climate change has affected the prevalence and how these disease outbreaks manifest through climate change. And so through our partnership with Malaria No More, what we're trying to do is utilize big data, weather data, Earth observation data, but also population data to create better prediction and planning tools for disease control programs. We started off with Odisha, India, and the pilot has been a great success since its launch in 2020, reducing the burden of malaria by 90% in the state of Odisha, which is instrumental for us as we scale up. What we try to do as well, just bringing it back to the conversation on how the UAE can play a role, we didn't just want to be philanthropic funders or passive philanthropic funders. We brought in the Mohammed bin Zayed University for Artificial Intelligence, who now have become a lead technical partner in this effort, to work closely with local partners to create even more accurate prediction and planning tools for this work. And that's the ethos of how we approach our work. We want to make sure that the UAE is part of the solution and that we're not just spending money or offering money in a very passive way.
And what do you think people would find most surprising in terms of the work that the UAE is doing in this space? You said being part of the solution. Absolutely, I hear you. But what do you think the rest of the world might find surprising about the process and the results that it's yielding?
I think not enough people know about the investments and long-term investments in disease elimination around the world. I would say 90% of His Highness's portfolio in disease elimination has focused on Africa. and is aimed at either eliminating or at least controlling some of the diseases I talked about. Last year, Bill Gates was in town to celebrate a big milestone for the portfolio, where we announced that Niger successfully eliminated one NTD called river blindness for the first time in Africa. This is a big feat because when people talk about disease elimination, they think this is an unreasonable goal or something that it cannot be achieved. But we've shown that through committed partnerships and committed investments from philanthropic funders, we can make big wins in the space. If I go back to how this all started, 30 years ago, our founding father, Sheikh Zayed, actually seeded the first UAE investment in neglected tropical disease elimination through a partnership with President Carter at the time, who was spearheading efforts on guinea worm eradication. Since then, the commitment is ongoing. We continue to work very closely with the Carter Center, and last year announced that there are only 15 cases of human cases of guinea worm worldwide, which is another big feat. So I think there are many successes that we can point to, and through approaching disease elimination, we're also strengthening global health systems at the same time.
Excellent. Christina, obviously there's usually talk of there being a moral imperative to providing universal energy to communities around the world, and I don't think anyone's going to argue against that, but it's also key to achieving sustainable development goals for all nations. How do you protect climate without causing energy poverty?
Thank you so much, and also congratulations to the prize. We actually at Power4All have a very special relationship to the prize. I was here 10 years ago to collect a prize when I was working with a company called D-Light, one of the early movers in rooftop solar for developing communities. And out of that work grew Power4All, which is a global campaign focused on ending energy poverty by accelerating the adoption of decentralized renewable energy. So your question is perfect, spot on, and renewables, I mean, it's a little bit of a softball, but absolutely renewables are one of the important ways of addressing development without really trying to make our situation worse when it comes to climate challenges. So in our world of energy, we focus on something called avoiding path dependency, and that means getting out of our business as usual approach to electrification. And if I could offer a friendly amendment to our prior speaker, in fact, these are not new technologies. D-Light itself has been around for over 15 years and has helped electrify the lives of 100 million people. And what's great about using these technologies, and yes, we are working to displace existing fossil fuel systems, kerosene, diesel, coal, charcoal, etc. But the idea of using a market-based approach is that people own their own energy and they buy into these systems that pay back to them instead of continuing to put their money, their budgets that already exist, into these fossil fuels at a local level that keep, absolutely providing light at night. But in this case, people own the source of the power that then continues to generate. So, so when it comes to looking at ways of addressing the moral imperative, which is giving people the opportunity to realize their full potential, which is only possible with having access to the kind of electricity that we're using here today, the way is renewables.
Right. And is there a specific community that you can touch on as well that's benefited from this?
Yeah, there's tons of great stories from around the world. I mean, in fact, most of the countries that are energy poor, and as we define it, it's Power4All, those are countries with 50% or less of the population having access to energy. That represents a group of an enormous potential of countries to grow these markets, but in particular, we've seen incredible uptake in some of the countries already mentioned today. So whether it's India or Nigeria or Kenya, but it's hard to find a corner of the world where decentralized renewables don't exist. And what's great is it has an application for almost every single SDG. So I'm actually here for addressing SDG 7. There's a big event before this event called the ARENA General Assembly. And among the topics that we cover is the role of renewables in addressing energy poverty. But there's incredible stories that also happen on a community level. And so when we see, for example, we were talking about farmers earlier, there's a great opportunity for renewables to radically improve productivity for smallholder farmers. And that's a community of 500 million farmers around the world that all research and practical application has showed once you improve that productivity, you're improving incomes, which creates even more lifestyle and choice improvement in people's lives.
And what's the biggest shift that you've seen when it comes to the perception of renewables, not just in the developing world, but in some of these communities that may not necessarily have been exposed to it before?
It's a great question. And I was in Ethiopia a couple of months ago. We have an agricultural program we call Powering Agriculture
I'm
there.
half Ethiopian.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes.
So anyway, one of the stories there, of course, in many of the countries that are energy poor, there's also an overlap with a number of smallholder farmers. So in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa and actually throughout the continent, including Ethiopia, 50%, 60, sometimes 70% of the population makes their income through farming. So it's really important that we find ways to address improving agriculture and productivity. But in fact, we were working with the Agricultural Technology Institute there, and they had told us, and we had some focus groups we did with the farmers as well, that in fact, diesel-powered water pumps, right? So that's an important way of growing farms and growing productivity, were causing more problems than good. Incredible opening for solar power because there's plenty of solar-powered irrigation out there. We just need to get into the hands of farmers, because what was the story from the farmers in Ethiopia is that the diesel quality was falling down and down and down. It was starting to clog their pumps. So that's just one example of how that I mean, it certainly wasn't planned, I'm sure, by the diesel importers to happen. Yeah. But in fact, there's just a perfect opening of where you see an opportunity to shift because of a problem with the existing infrastructure system. And absolutely, we do have an incumbent system that has a great distribution mechanism. But beyond that, with that was the opportunity to educate farmers about access to solar pumps and showing how with financing in a short amount of time, for the same amount of money they're spending on a diesel pump, they can actually own a system that powers itself and in fact save money, make more money, and if they want, buy more pumps.
And what do they need right now in order to scale?
The solar water pump providers? Well, in many cases, political will is an issue. So one of the things we've been working on for a number of years is to try to get countries who have energy poverty issues to create energy policy that not only has an ambitious target for universal access, but also has carve-outs for that access to be delivered by decentralized means. So that means rooftop solar, that means mini-grids, et cetera. So that kind of commitment is one level, but then after that, what we need are countries to make it easier for the companies to do business. And that means everything from making easier access to foreign exchange to creating an easier sort of one-stop shop approach to setting up business in these countries. But as soon as we can open for the market will grow and help in this problem of energy poverty.
So we're sitting here in a country that's been on a tremendous journey for the past 50 years. It's completely transformed. But like I mentioned before, the UAE has really emerged as a hub for the developing world, for other countries in the Middle East, Africa, increasingly. What can be done in order to support or making climate action more inclusive? Because it's quite easy to sit in the West and preach to the developing world, but how do we empower them to make the changes without sacrificing their own economic prosperity? It's a question for all of you, really. Do you want to start it?
I think by pricing carbon right. So currently what we have is carbon is anywhere between, of course the market had collapsed to 20 cents, so let's not talk about that. We're in a more realistic scenario now, about $22 a ton. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you have companies like Climeworks, Global Thermostat, Carbon Engineering and all, 1,000 euros a ton. They're selling it on their website actually, and there are tens of thousands of people buying. Call me crazy for calling it crazy, but it is what it is. So yes, you believe in technology, and by their own admission, they say that it will get to 1 billion tons, the entire industry, not that company. That company actually reduced 3,500 tons of carbon, only 3,500 tons. You could have gone to the market and bought it for $70,000. And they raised $650 million last year for a piece of that company. How about we acknowledging and respecting the people that break their backs, these women who actually grow the food that nourishes and keeps the human race alive? How about giving them some respect? How about pricing that carbon in a way, say $100? Actually, if we get to $100 for what I call better carbon or SDG carbon, because this is not, carbon is a scientific measure, it's the same. Whether you remove it, you sequester it, you mitigate it, you reduce it, it's all the same in terms of scientific value. But in terms of social, economic, and environmental value, there are multiple pathways. And the pathway these people take, you talked about malaria. Andhra Pradesh is the neighboring state to Orissa. We picked up primary health center data in 93 bio-villages in Andhra Pradesh that have been doing this for 5 years. Malaria, anemia, cancer, diarrhea, the drop in incidence of diseases is 90% because poor people, for the first time, have access to clean food. They can never go to a supermarket and buy organic food. But when they grow it themselves, what they call natural farming, they actually keep enough food for themselves before it goes to market. So you're actually transforming the entire social infrastructure, be it public health. Water conservation is 50%. We have incontrovertible evidence now because, as Christine was talking about, they use these pumps, what they call bore wells. So now we have documented electricity meters and data that tells us that they're pumping 50% less water since they started this process. So, one could go on and on. India currently spends $30 billion. Last year, they spent $30 billion on fertilizer subsidies. Another $18 billion on farm electricity subsidies. Add another $12 billion on interest subvention schemes, farm loan waivers. Come every political election cycle, every political party is falling over each other to waive all the loans, destroying the credit infrastructure, credit architecture in the country, because if I never have to pay back, I just keep taking money. There is no banking architecture left anymore. So, but if you leave that, if you follow the right path, get the right price of carbon, then you'll incentivize 120 million smallholder farmers just in India. The world has 500 million. And that, with an average family size of 4, you're talking about 500 million people only in India that would have come out of poverty at the grassroots, creating prosperity where it matters, improving public health exponentially. So that's where the impact is. If we can find the right price of carbon, not just to acknowledge, not just to be grateful for what they do, but respect, because there is the modern economy, the only way you can show respect is for the market to price it right. Because then you don't have to go and convince people, hey, please change. People will change themselves because it will be economically remunerative to change behavior.
And at the end of the day, it's about building inclusive economies where everyone can thrive.
And let me conclude by saying this. If you take the steel industry, if you take the IT and the IT-enabled services industry, let's take the automotive, let's take the transport sector, add all of that, 50 million jobs worldwide. Just 50 million.
Yeah.
There are 1 billion people employed in agriculture. With an average family size of 4, that's 4 billion people, 50% of the world's population. We fix our food systems, we'll fix the climate problem. So let's put all our heads together and respond. Adrian talked about Producers Market. They're a partner in this program in Andhra Pradesh. I invited Keith to come and he's been a huge help. The point is that we really need to go to where the impact is, where the real people are, and whose lives will change. And as it changes, it will change and transform the world.
Excellent.
If I could I just add if I could just add, and obviously that was well received, but just to add to that as well, I think one of the things that we're fundamentally talking about here, especially with decentralized energy, is also decentralizing and democratizing power. As soon as we change the way that business as usual energy delivery happens, we change the way that this inclusive movement can happen. And I think one of the important things to remember is that the more we can make room for the market to grow, that actually means local jobs. And in fact, what we see in the renewable sector, including the decentralized sector, is women have more jobs, in fact, twice as many by percentage in the renewables industry than in the traditional fossil fuels industry. So that also means creating a pathway for young women, young men to have careers. They would need to grow up. We need a renewable energy generation that sees renewables as business as usual, not traditional centralized fossil fuel-based power. So that would be my salvo. And the other thing that can be done is just, we need to be considering this as infrastructure. It's not steel in the ground as we traditionally know when it's decentralized, but it is absolutely energy infrastructure, and it needs to have fair access to subsidy in order to create this opportunity.
And Tala, final word as we almost wrap up here.
That's a lot of pressure, but just bringing it back to our conversation on global health and the importance of creating local solutions to local problems. There is an urgent need to better understand the climate and health nexus. And currently, we don't have the data for it. A lot of the data that we do receive is from the global north. And to be able to do our work more effectively in the countries and communities that need it most, we need data that is inclusive, that is equitable, and is applicable to the communities that we're trying to serve. And I think more importantly as well, we need to approach this work in a way that centers the voices and experiences of the people that know their communities most. And for the work that we do, these are the frontline health workers, these are community health workers that are delivering the vast majority of primary health care to these communities. And so that continues to be an ethos that we need to pursue. And that is the only way we believe we can be successful in our efforts to reduce the burden of disease on everyone that is affected by these unfortunate and preventable diseases that continue to disable, disfigure, pull out people from productive opportunities, and really stifle their livelihoods.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. It's been inspiring to hear about the work that you guys are doing on the ground, be it in Asia, Africa, or the Middle East as well. So thank you very much, and thank you to our audience for listening as well. Thank you.
Thank you.